Hello. So at least as of the time of filming this, this Fog of War sudoku came out earlier today for Cracking the Cryptic, but by the time this gets posted, it'll probably been at least a week. But I just really like Fog of War sudoku, so figured might as well do it. So this one has some fairly complicated rules to it. First of all, every box is to have 0 through 9, so that means there's going to be one cell in each box that has 2 numbers in it. Additionally, it's Fog of War, and there's a lot of clue types that happen that show up 3 times in the grid, for which 2 of them are correct and the other one is false. There's counting circles, which the number in each circle has to be how many times that digit is in circles like throughout the grid. Then there's Dutch and German Whisper with their standard rules, crop key for black dots and white dots. I'm not sure if there's going to be 3 crop key total or 3 of each, but we'll see. And then there's XV for the same things. So, I guess all 3 V's are already here, and 2 of these have to be accurate and 1 of them has to be false. So I'm going to use red to mark the Schrodinger cells, because if you think about it, since 2 of these have to be accurate, 2 of them involve this number, which means this number here has to have 2 different values to be valid. So that's going to be a 1, 2, 3, or 4. Or it has to be 2 of 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the other 2 have to appear in some of the nearby cells. Additionally, there's also German Whisper, multiple lines of German Whispers present on here. And I didn't mention this earlier, but actually no, this one can't be Schrodinger. I got that wrong, because for everything other than the circles, it's going to be the sum that counts. So actually this one isn't a Schrodinger. It has to be one of these 3 that is. And considering that there's 2 green lines here, they must both be accurate, so I'm gonna I guess I'll make my Schrodingers be gray so I can use parity coloring for this. So, based on the fact, I also know that one of these 3 has to be the Schrodinger, and gray is not going to distinguish well from fog, so I'm going to use black instead. Now I know both of these German Whispers have to be accurate, and this cell can't be a Schrodinger, so it's a 1, 2, 3, or a 4, which means it is a low-valued cell. And the other one needs to be, for it to be accurate. Let's see, German Whisper adjacent cells differ by at least 5. Must contain values summing to 5. Okay. So actually this red-green coloring is not going to help out as much as I thought. So I'm just going to get rid of that, because I realized this one can be a 5 since there can be a 0 in one of these. And additionally, the only way to make this German Whisper work is for this to be a 5, because if this is lower than a 5, then whichever one of these 2 is a valid one also has to be lower than a 5, and that wouldn't work for German Whispers, which, since there are 2 of them here, these have to both be valid, since only one of them could be invalid. So this has to be a 5 here, or apparently not, because that was marked incorrectly, so I was wrong there. Well, this has to be a 5 or a 0, actually, so I guess technically I know it's a 0 because I messed up, but I'll just keep on going like I don't know it's a 0. So one of these 2 is valid, the other one is invalid, and this one going down here must also be valid. So, let's see. If this is a 0, then, or well, I guess if this is a 5, then one of these would have to be a Schrodinger cell, which would break, because if this is 5, one of them has to be 0. The other one would need to be a Schrodinger cell, adding up to at least 10, but then this one down here would have to be 0 to be a valid V clue. So, therefore, I guess it has to be 0, so I kind of stumbled my way into there, but At least one of these is a 5. Theoretically, they could both be the valid ones, and have one of them just be 5 and the other be a Schrodinger adding up to 5, but I guess now I have my answer for crop keys as well. There's going to be 3 of each, so there's also probably 3 X's out there. And, yeah, at least one of those two has to be a 5, or, well, one of these 3 has to be a 5, and one of them has to be digits adding up to 5. So, of these 3 white dots, if this one is valid, then this has to be a 1, which, theoretically, since one of these 2 black-white pairs, well, they could both be white or black, so there's actually no way to lock it in. No. So, there is these 2 groups of cells here. If white and black are true for one of them, it has to be a 1-2 pair, since that's the only ratio that is 1 to 2 and is a 1 different. So, if neither of these happen to be a 1-2 pair, that means the black dot has to be invalid for one and the white dot has to be invalid for the other, which would suggest that this white dot is true. So then this would have to be a 1, which would suggest that if, I'm just going to use pencil marking there, if this is a 1 now with this white dot valid, then one of these 2 is going to have a valid white dot, which would mean it needs to be a 0 or a 2, which is possible. It's possible for it to be a 0, say for instance this is a white dot. But now then, the other one's a black dot. And the only way a black dot could be true is if it is a 2 or something adding up to a 2. And that would force the white dot to also be true. Which means that no matter what, there has to be a 1-2 pair within these 3 cells. Although I can't deduce yet that the 1 has to be in this cell, because theoretically it could be a like 1, 2, 3, for instance, and just have this white dot be wrong and this black dot be wrong, and that be a 4. Yeah, so that is another possibility. In fact, those might be the only possibilities, because, well, there's first of all the assumption that this white dot is accurate, but if this white dot is, in which case one of these 2 is a 2, and if this white dot is inaccurate, then one of these 2 has to be a 1, and this middle one has to be a 2, and the other one has to be a 3. So, this guy here is either 1 or 2, and can't be a Schrodinger, I don't think. Well, yeah, it just can't be. Yeah, no, it couldn't be a Schrodinger because the only way for it to be 2 is either 2 or 2 plus 0, but the 0 is already down here. So, yeah. Let me get that. And is there just one Schrodinger in each row? Well, logically there has to be one Schrodinger in each row. So, yeah, just thinking about it, since there needs to be 10 digits total, and there can only be one square that has 2 digits in it to make that work in each one, so there's one Schrodinger in each row column, and 3 by 3, one of these. Now for if this is a 1, I think that's going to break the black dots, because there's only one way I can make it 2, since I can't use 2 smaller numbers to add up to 2, and there's 3 black dots, of which 2 of them had to be true. So this one has to be a 2, and couldn't be a Schrodinger because of the 0 down there. So one of these is a 1, and then one of these 3 is a 4, and there's no way to sum up to a 4, so because 1's already going to be used in a different one. So then we get that. So one of these 2 has to be a Schrodinger cell, and the other one is going to be the false one for this, right? Because the only way to make 15 is to have a Schrodinger of 6, 9, or 7, 8. And there can only be one Schrodinger cell in each box, so one of those 2 has to be the false cage of the 3. Which I'm going to use a red, I guess, to mark false. I will mark that as a red, even though that one doesn't help as much. So one of these has to be a 1, and the other one has to be a 3, so actually I can't have 4 in either of these. It means this one has to be a 4. And can only be a Schrodinger because it's 0 and the Schrodinger's here. Since one of those is a Schrodinger, I can determine that these two have to be a 1-3 pair. Now then this X could be false. But up here I have Dutch whisper lines. And there's two of them lined up, so they have to both be accurate. Okay. So also one of these four has to be a 0, because I could theoretically have a 0 in whichever one of these two 15s is the false one, or on one of these two spots. A Dutch whisper has to differ by at least 4, so I can't have a 5 here. So it has to be a minimum of 6. Because if I have a 5, I'll need to have a 1 and a 9, or a 0, and so I can't have 5 because it could be the 0 as well. So theoretically 5 is possible. If I have a 6, then the only digits that are at least 4 away be, let's see, 1, 2, and 0, but 1 and 2 are accounted for, so 6 is out of the listing, which means this is going to be the false X. If this is a 7, then it would have to be 0, 1, 2, or 3, which also doesn't work. Same thing for 8, so this one has to be a 5 or a 9. If this is a 9, then this is a 0 and a 5, because 9 needs to have at least 5 or lower in the adjacent ones, and 1 through 4 are being used. And if this is a 5, it has to be 0 and 9. So I actually get a triple there, which tells me the other ones are 6, 7, and 8. Which 8 is in one of them and 6, 7 are in the other. Okay. I really feel like now. Let's see. The Schrodinger can't be this one anymore, because there's no way to add up 2 cells to get a 5, and the Schrodinger needs to be one of the 2 valid ones. Which means this is either 5 or just completely invalid. Now I have Schrodingers in both of those columns, so one of those 3 has to be a Schrodinger as well. One of these 2 needs to add up to 5, and I don't have a way to determine which one it is that adds up to 5. Because the other one could just be a larger number overall. Or it could just be 5. Alright. Each of these German whispers goes over further. So if I have a 5 in one, it would just need to have a 1 next to it. And if I have a 0 or a 9, there's a lot more options. So I don't think I can determine from that. Can I determine from this? Because theoretically, something important to know is one of these theoretically could be wrong further outside, because only one of them necessarily needs to be accurate. Although for this one, these 2 outside digits here are also guaranteed to be true, since these 2 Dutch whispers continue out here. So yeah, if I have a 9 here, then one of these is a 5, which has to be next to a 1. The other one is a 0, which has to be next to something 6 through 8, or some pair of digits that add up to that. If I have a 5 here, then I have a 0 and a 9, and there's not a great way to determine from that what's going on. Okay. I'm just quickly glancing at the rules to see if there's any other things I can figure out from this. I think I know all the rules. Yeah, it looks like I do. So then one of these is going to be 7, 8, and the other one is just a 6. Yeah. Okay. Where do I go next is the real question. Theoretically, if either of these ones are a 5, then that guarantees that German whisper is going to be false, because the Schrodinger is already being used. If this guy's a 5, though, then one of these adds up to 5, and that one is still false. Yeah, no, that one's still false because the Schrodinger is guaranteed to be used, so one of these isn't going to be able to work, because 5 typically could not be in a German whisper, and the only reason it could be in one of these is because there's a 0. But the 0's already been used, and the Schrodinger has already been used, so I can't make anything larger, which means this one down here does have to be a valid 5, since both of these can't be 5s. The only way for it to be a valid 5 is for it to be the number 5. Great, there we go. That makes this a 9, which makes these a 0, 5 forced pair, which means that I do know one of these is a 1. And it can't be a Schrodinger adding up to a 1, because the only way to do that would be 0 and 1, but 0 is already used. The other one is a 0, which just means it has to be 6, 7, 8, or some combination of smaller numbers I can't really determine. Now then, here I have a cage that has to be valid, because the false one's one of these two, which means this one has to be a 1, 2, 3 triple, or a 1, 2, 3 and a 0. And if there was a 0, it would be there as a Schrodinger, so these ones had to be 1, 2, or 3. This one can't be a 2, so that's a 1 or a 3. 1, 2, 3, and I'll put a 0 in here. Because theoretically could be 0, could be a 0 and a 1, a 2, or a 3. Because this, like, for instance, cage could extend like that. That's another possibility. But what this means is that at least one of 2 and 3 are going to be in here, which means there has to be a 1-4 combination summing up to that. So this has to be a 3 and a 2, and as expected, surprisingly enough, we do have that there are 2 cells, which means neither of these can be Schrodingers. So I guess I will use purple to mark that, just out of lack of a better color right now. And that means I can't have a 1 here, so then the 1 has to be over there, or not, because I guess I might be wrong. So, oh, yeah, no, I'm scratch that thinking, because I could have 2 cells adding up to 9, so, yeah, no, that's not happening. Now for the circles. I can't have 0 in a circle, so 0's in this circle, it has to be false, or the false circle, for instance, because in a circle, if 0 was in one, there would have to be 0 zeros in a circle, but there's already a 0 in a circle, so yeah. Now one of these has to be 1, 4, and the other one just has to be a number larger than 5. So theoretically any number can be in those two, and I don't have a great way to determine what is and isn't. Down here I have 1, 6, 7, 8. Okay. Now I already know that X is wrong, so this one has to be correct, which means if this is a 1, this is a 9, and if this is a 0, this has to be 2 cells adding up to 9. Or 2 cells adding up to 10, of which one of those would have to be greater than 2. Which means either way, this top circle up here has to be the false. Excuse me. It has to be the false one, because I know for a fact there are only 3 circles, of which only 2 of them are accurate. So either way, this one is going to be the false one, which means this can't be, so this one has to have a 1, and this has to be a 0, and I will get rid of those markings because it doesn't matter. So this is either a 9 or 2 cells adding up to a 9. So not a clear way to determine which yet. Here's the third German whisper, which this one has to be accurate, because one of these two up here is already guaranteed to be false once it goes further out. And then, okay. So if this is a Schrodinger, there's 3 different ways it could add up, and if it's not, then it could just be a 9. So I can't conclude anything from that yet. Down here I have a German whisper that's at least this long, and a 0 cannot be included in these 2 cells, or here. Could be included there, but that means I can't... Yeah, the fact that I don't know where the Schrodinger is in this row right now means it's going to be tricky to get much definitive with that, although I think that is where I need to go. This is where I need to think about it next. Okay. So, if either this one's a Schrodinger or it's not. If this is a Schrodinger, then what that tells me is that the rest of these I can deduce their numbers other ways. And if this isn't a Schrodinger, then I at least know that's not a Schrodinger. So, if this one's not a Schrodinger, then it has to be 1, 6, 7, or 1, 6, 7, or 8. Well, it can't be 6 because then that would need to be a 1. Or, no, it could be a 0 though. So actually that doesn't discount anything. Okay. Alright. In that case, I'm going to see if there's anywhere else I can reason about something. I know there's a 1 over there, because there's a 1 in one of these two, and a 4 in one, the same one up there. And other than that, the tricky part is that I'm not really positive where the next step is. Well, okay, let's see. I know that there's a 2 in this column, although I doubt that's going to help me right now. And if this one is a Schrodinger, then it's going to be at least a 7, but more likely than not a value over 10. Because if 1's included, then it's 7, 8, or 9, but if 1's not included, it's 13, 14, or 15. And if it was 13, 14, or 15, then realistically, unless it's 13, in which case this has to be a 5. Oh, snap. That's actually something to note. If this is a Schrodinger, then what does this have to be? Well, if this guy is 6, 7, or 8, or well, 7, 8, or 9, then this one has to be 3 or 4, because it can't be 1 since that's here, and it can't be 2 because of that. If this is 3 or 4, then this one has to be high again, and this one has to be 1, 2, 3, or 4. But if this one is 6, 7, 6, 8, or 7, 8, then this one either has to be 9 if it can, but if this is 6 and 7, then this one would have to be at most an 8, but it can't be an 8, a 6, or a 7, so it has to be a 5 or lower. And it can't be a 5 because that would break, so it has to be lower. Which means this guy is either a 9 or a 3 or a 4. Because it can't be a 1 or a 2, and it just can't ever be a 5 since either way one of these two is going to break if there's a 5 included here. So it's a 3 or 4 or a 9. And if this is a 4, then these both have to be 9s. And this one would have to add up to 9, and this one just has to be 9. So that's one possibility. And if this is 3 or 4, then, or well, if this is 3, then this one doesn't necessarily need to be a sum. This one would have to be 8, 9, or 2 numbers adding up to it. So I can't really deduce much from that. And this is a 9, it just means that this one's just either a standard 1, which the standard, if this is just a 1, then this one has to be 6, 7, 8, or 9, but 6, 7, and 8 are already being used, so it has to still be a 9. And if it's a 6, then this one can't be anything. If it's a 7, this would still not be able to be anything. It's just a standard 8, then this one has to be a 3. So 3, 4, and 9 are the only possibilities for this square. Or 0. Because I forgot about 0. But yeah. And 0 here doesn't break because I could have a 5, or I can just have higher than a 5, yeah. So now 0, 3, 4, and 9 for that one. Which does not inspire confidence when 0's in the mix, because, yeah, 0 really messes with my head a little. Okay, if 1 and 4 are used, then the other one of these can't have the one that's not a Schrodinger 5 guaranteed that's going to break. Can't be a 6, because a 6 requires a 1 next to it. So it has to be a 7, 8, or 9. And it could be a 7, 8, or 9, because it just needs to have, in that case, a 2 next to it, for instance, and there's no reason it couldn't be a 2 next to it for any of those scenarios. Okay. So the next step really might be using that the Dutch Whisper up top then. That's the only other thing I can think of. Because I already know for a fact the circle's false, but that isn't going to help me too much right now, and I know the X is valid, which also doesn't really limit me. The only number I couldn't possibly have in here at all is 0, 1, and 4, the rest of them, or 8, I guess, but the rest numbers could show up. Up here, though, one of these is a 5, and the 5, if it's here, for instance, this has to add up to 10, which can only be done if it has a Schrodinger. If it's over here, this could be a 1, or add up to over 10. And the 0 just needs a number 4 or above. So, I actually take that back. That's not where I go then, because there's nothing I can get out of that. Yeah. Huh. And I know that this one has to be valid. So, yeah, not knowing where the Schrodinger is in this bottom box here is making this a bit trickier. But that might not be the only problem. So, let's see. One of these is going to be a 7-8 pair. Whichever one it is going to force 7-8 to be in the column of the other one. And likewise, 6 is forced to be in the column of one of them. Okay, so that doesn't get me any great information. If I could determine, like for instance, this guy was a 6, and I know there's a 6 right there. Or if this is if this one's a 7-8 pair, then there's a 7 and an 8 in each of these, which saying that now means I at least know this is a 6, 7, or an 8. Because if this is a 6, there has to be a 6 here, and this is a 7-8 pair. One of these is 7, the other is 8. Okay. And one of these two is going to force a 4 to be in the opposite end. And either 6 or one of 7 and 8 minimum have to appear there. Okay. So I already know 1 and 4 out of this row. But that doesn't tell me a great deal. I just know there's a 4 somewhere in there. And since this one could still be a 1, that doesn't mean, well, I can't determine if there's a Schrodinger locked into one of these two over here. Huh. Yeah, I just keep scanning back these rules to see if there's something critical I'm missing, and there just never is, but I'm just gonna have to keep scratching my head at this while I try and see what the next break-in is. Because I really feel like it has to have something to do with this bottom German whispers here. I just can't figure out what is the trouble. So the introduction of Schrodinger's, I can't even use like number parity to determine if it's like above 5 or below 5, because I can get numbers over 10. So that system breaks down when I can have a possible third size of elements. Yeah, for the counting circles. Tells me how many circles contain that digit. I know that this one is the false one, so... Oh, I got it. I know this is the false counting circle, but what about the third counting circle? What number or two numbers could it have in it? Well, it can't have 1 because 1's already in this one, and since this one's false, this one has to be true. It can't have 0 because that's impossible. And there's only one of... So it has to have at least a 2, but it can't have 3 or more because 1 is already accounted for. So the other one must just have 2. Now this one then also needs to include a 2, but for a couple reasons. Well, first of all, it has to be false, so it can't just include a 2 because then it would be true. Secondly, it needs to add up to 9, so this one must be a Schrodinger of 2 and 7. And there we go, that's information gained. This one has to be the Schrodinger for this row, which means there's a Schrodinger down here. I know this is now a 2-7 pair, which means there's a 2 up here. This means I don't have a Schrodinger down here. I also can't have a Schrodinger up here, which means that this one now, it can't be a 1, and it can't be a Schrodinger, so it can't add up to more than to 9 or above. So this one cannot be a 5 anymore. It has to be the 0. This one has to be the 5. And okay. So now I also know that's not a 0 because it's up there, I guess. And it just keeps on going. So this one is either 1 or it's a Schrodinger, so it's down up to 10 or up. Now I know both of these need to follow the German whisper rules. So this one has to be a minimum of 4. And there's no Schrodinger in this column, so I can just use standard logic. Or standard, whatever, Dutch whisper logic. So this one's a 4, this one has to be an 8 or a 9, can't be an 8 because of that, so it would have to be a 9. Even this is a 6, and then this has to be 2, because it can't be, well, it can't be 6, because that one can't be 2, 1, or 0. If this is a 7, this has to be a 3, and if this is an 8, this one has to be a 4 or 3, which means it has to be a 3. So this is a 3 or a 9, and this one also has to follow the same rules. So if I have 3 over here, this one has to be a 7, 8, or 9, can't be a 7, so it's an 8 or a 9. Well, this one also can't be 7 because of that, actually. So this is a 4 or an 8. If this is a 3, this one had to be an 8, which means this one has to be a 9. If this is a 4, that's a 9, so then this one has to be at most a 5. And it can't be 4, so it's actually just 5. Because it also can't be 1, 2, 3, or 0, so then this one would have to be a 5 or a 9 and can't be a Schrodinger still. Okay, which means I know for a fact there's a 9 in one of these two, because 3 goes to 9 here, and otherwise there's just a 9 there. And okay, now this X over here has to be valid, which means that this group, which if this is a 1, then this just has to be a 9. So that's going to be one possibility. And I can't have a Schrodinger here, but if I have a Schrodinger over here, then this has to sum up to exactly 9, which would mean that there's a 1 here, and this has to be a group of numbers summing up to 9, which can't be 1, 8 because of the 1 below, can't be 4, 5 because of the 5 right here, so it has to be 2, 7, or 3, 6, so I'll mark that in there. Either way, there's a 1 in one of these two, so not a 1 there. Okay, and I will mark that in there. Alright. And this is the end of one of the Dutch whispers, which means this one could break the pattern of being valid. Or it could not. There's not a great way to determine whether it does or doesn't break the pattern. Either way, I also now know that there isn't, whatever it is, a Schrodinger down here, which means this one can't be 4 anymore, because that would need a 9 over there, and 9's already taken up there. So this is a 3 or a 9. If this is a 3, this is an 8, and if this is a 9, this one has to be a 3 or a 4, because it can't be 0, 1, or 2, so that's a 3, 4, 8. Which, okay, so there's a 4, 8 here and there, potentially, or there's a 3, in which case this is a 9, that's a 5, and that's a 4. Alright. Let's see. So now there's only 2 spaces left in the grid for a 6. And I can't see a reason for it to not be either of these. So let's think back onto this. So now if this is a 4, then this has to be a Schrodinger. If this is a Schrodinger, then okay, sorry about that. Had to take something real quick, but now I'm back. So let's see where I was at. So I had been messing around with this stuff here, but the more I look at it, the less I feel like I can deduce immediately from it. At least that's what I'm currently thinking. Because, I mean, like, there's just too many combinations and too much unknown. This is the main issue I'm running into. Let's see, what else is in this column? Because this column might be key. 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. And 6 has to be in one of these 2. I don't think the knowledge about the 6 is going to help all that much. Okay. Actually, here's a thought. Is that if this isn't the 1, 4, then what numbers could this be? Because this one has to then be one that's not going to break. So if this isn't 1, 4, then it has to be 7, 8, or 9. It can't be 7 because of a 2 here. If it's 8, this is a 3, and if it's a 9, this has to be a 3. Because... or it could be a 4, I guess. No, it can't be a 4 because of this. So, this is a 3, or if this is the 1, 4, then I don't really know what that is, but I know that this one is a 2 or a 3. And it could be either, so I can't lock anything out from that. But I guess it was something to consider all the same. Well then I know neither of these 2 can be a 7 now. Which means 7 has to be in this column. But it can't be here because of this. So one of these 2 is a 7. Which means that I can't have a 7 or an 8 here, so this one has to be the 6. And it lit up, which means I'm right, so I don't need either of these anymore. I now know that that's the Schrodinger, which means this is the Schrodinger, which means that this one has to be the 1, 4 pair. Which means that now this is an 8 or a 9, and this one here has to be a 3 or a 4. So not a 6. Which means that this one, well, this one over here actually can't be 8. So it has to be a 9. And this one here has to then be a 6, and that's a 3, and then this is a 6. And based on the fact I'm seeing the fog lighting up means I'm not making another just blatant incorrect assumption, which is good. So this one here now can't be a 4 because I know that this keeps on going and this is the valid path, as opposed to this one, which is the invalid. This group is the invalid German Whispers. Also, this has to be an 8 to keep this going. And that means you're a 4, this is a 9, here's a 5, this one's a 3 now, which I was going to get to anyways because if it was a 4 that had to be a 9, so that's an 8. This here is a valid, okay, so that means I know that this square, well, the longer one of these 2 has to be invalid since they both reach the end here for this Dutch Whisper, and this one is just valid anyways. So that's good to know. This one continues on further this way, which, well, this has to be a Schrodinger, because it can't not be a Schrodinger now, since there's no numbers here that are 5 away from 3, which have to be 8 or 9, but 8 and 9 can't be here unless you add up to them. which means that this one needs to have a 7 in it because 1 plus 6 adds up to 7, which is not far enough away. Well, also, this one now has to be a 1, or not, surprise. What am I getting wrong here? Now, this number theoretically could also be 0, so I missed that. So this is 0 or 1, this guy over here is complete nonsense then, because I missed the fact this could just add up to 10. Either way, I know this can't be a 1 now, so it has to be a Schrodinger, because the 9 here enforces that, which means this is a Schrodinger that adds up to 9 or 10, because it can't go higher than 10. And ignoring the fact I already 100% know which one it is because I'm messing up, I will not solve it from that. I'm going to have to do it logically, because, you know, otherwise what's the point of doing a sudoku if you're just going to guess everything? Okay, so this is a 10, it has to be 2, 8, or 3, 7. And if this is a 9, it has to be 2, 7, or 3, 6. And those are the only possibilities. Now, then over here, one of these two is a Schrodinger, because those two have already been taken. And this 5 here needs to have a 0 or a 9 plus add it. It can get 0, or it has to have two numbers that add up to at least a 9. Or because it can't be a 1, since there's a 1 here. I don't have a great way to determine which of the two it is yet, so I'm just not going to worry about that. And I'll move on to something else. Okay, so one of these two is an 8. That's not helpful either at the moment. Okay. Well, since this is an 8 and I know this is a Schrodinger now, I can determine that this has to be a 1 or a 2 because it can't be a 0. Furthermore, since this has to sum up to either 8 or 13, if it adds up to an 8, then this is a 1 or a 2, can't be a 1, so it's actually a 2 or a 0. And this adds up to 13, then this has to just be any number less than 6, because it can't be 7 or 6, or 8, so. And that would be 0, 2, or 4, because 5 and 6 are both up here. Well, actually it can't be 4, because there's also 4 there, so this is just a 0 or 2, no matter what. Which means that it doesn't really matter what's in that Schrodinger cell for this to happen, so I can't determine anything about the contents of this. This column here just needs a 4 and a 5 left in it, and this one over here is going to be 0, 2, and 9. So this one here is a 2 or a 9, and this one here could be any of the 3. Okay. This cell just has to be something that is less than 5 away, which is literally every number possible from 5. So I can't determine any numbers this could not be from that. So up here, these 3 cells, they have to be valid Dutch whisper cells. And I know that there's an 8 either here or here. If this is an 8, then I just need to have numbers 1, 2, 0 through 3. If this is a 6, then that gets restricted down to 0 to 2. And if this is, for instance, a 3, then it has to be 7 or... Well, this can't be 3, and it can't be 0, it can't be 4, so if this is a 1 or a 2, which are the lower numbers, then it has to just be 6, 7, or 8, which would mean these two would have to be 6 or 7 if this is a 1, and if it's a 2, it's not possible. Or, no, that's incorrect thinking, because it can be 4 away, so a 2 could also work for the same 6, 7 pairing. Actually, no, neither of them do work, because this can't be a 6 or a 7, so this one here can't be 1 or 2. It also can't be 3, because there also can't be 8 here. It can't be 4 or 5 because of this, so it has to be a minimum of 6, so it's 6, 7, or 8 up here. If this is a 6, then it has to be 0 through 2. If it's a 7, 0 through 3, and if it's an 8, 0 through 4, which means that this one here has to be 1, 2, or 3, and this one here has to be 0, 1, 2, or 3. which means that 2 of 6, 7, 8 are going to appear in these, and they can't appear up here. They both must be down here. And one of these two is a Schrodinger, but the other one isn't. And unless the Schrodinger contains both of the remaining two, which is possible. Also, since this one can't be 6, 7, or 8, it has to be 0, 1, 2, or 3 as well. And over here, one of these two has to be a 5. Additionally, this one can no longer be a Schrodinger, although that's not going to help me at the moment. It's... yeah. Over here, these two cells. I could have done this a while ago, but that one's a 7. This one over here has to just be a 2, which makes that a 9. And this is all part of the same German whisper then, because neither of the ones up there connect. This one here has to be the remaining cell of an 8. This can no longer be a 2, which means that the 2, 8, which is the only possible pairing for 8, is out the window, I think. Because, yeah. So this is either 3, 7 or 3, 6 to add up to 10 or 9. It doesn't matter which, there's going to be a 3 in here. So that's no longer a 3. Which means one of those two is a 3, but that doesn't really tell me much of anything at all. Okay. Now then, if all this is the same German whisper, and since I already have the Schrodinger out for this row, let's see. What possible values could this have? This one has to be at least a 5. Because if 0 is here, it can be 5, 6, 7, or 9. If it is a... well, actually it can't be 5 still, because then it would break the next one. So this one is 6, 7, or 9, which means that this one has to be 1, 3, or 4. Well, 1 or 4, because 2 and 3 are out, or it could be 0. So this one is now 0, 1, or 4. And that means this one up here has to be, once again, well, this one could be 5, 6, 7, or 9, because this can be a Schrodinger up here. It is possible, and probably what it's going to end up being. Okay. So then I have 1 of 5, 6, 7, 1 of 5, 6, 7, 9 here. Either 1 or 2 of 5, 6, 7, 9 here. I'm not sure how many of 5, 6, 7, 9 I have over here. But that means I can't really determine what this square is. Okay. Either way, this one is high. So, this one has to be at least a 5. No, that's not true. This one could be low if this one is above a 10 or something, for instance. Okay. This one actually has to have a 7 in it, so neither of those can have 7s in them. And if I have a 4 here, this guarantee breaks, because I need to have 2 9s next to it. So this is a 0 or 1, that's a 0 or 2, and that's a 1 or a 2, which means this has to just be a 6, 7 pair. Which means I know for a fact this guy's a 9, and this one's a 5. Which means that's a 0, here is a Schrodinger, and that's a Schrodinger there. And that's no longer a 5, which makes this a 5, and now I know this square just has to break, which means this is going to be a 10 or a 9, so it has to be above, it has to be 6, 7, or 8. Yeah, because it needs to break this, and from 9, the closest you can be to break is 6. Which means I have a 6, 7, or an 8 here, 6, 7, or 8 here, and a 6, 7 here. I have a 3 here, which means this is a 1, 2 pair up here to correspond to that. And this one now has to be a 2, and a 0 here, and a 1 here, and I can get rid of the 6 on that. That's a 1 or an 8. This has to add up to at least 10 now. But it could be higher. So I can't really determine what that is, and because of how high this can go, I can't really determine what this is either, I don't think. Yeah, because it can even get up to 8 if this is a 6 and a 7 here. Either way, there's now no 1 in this column, so that's a 2, that's a 1, which means this is a 0, so I can now determine that this is a 3, 7 pair, which is a 10. So 10 means I can't have a 6 here, I have to have an 8 here, which means I need to have an 8 here, which means I get this, and that's a 3, and there's a 1. And I actually can't determine if this is just an 8 or if it's saying something else. Either way, 6 or 7 works here. Well, this one has to be a 6, actually, which means I now know there's an 8 here, and then there's also a 7 and a 9, or no, not a 7 and a 9, a 7 and a 0. So, let's see. It would be odd if I couldn't figure out which one of these two is the Schrodinger here now. So, no matter what, this one has to include a... Well, this one needs to be at least 4 away, so if it includes 7, it's going to break, which means it just has to be 0. Which means that the other one over here is the Schrodinger at 15, which is such a large number that pretty much no matter what it was next... No, literally no matter what it was next to, it's going to be fine. But yeah, that works there, which means I just have 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9 for these. Can't have a 6 in either of these. Can't have a 6 here, so this is a 6, which means I just have 4, 5, 7, and 9. This one can't be 7 or 5, so this one is 4, 9. And this one also can't be, well, this one can't be 9, so it's 4, 5, 7, and this one can be anything. Over here, I just have a 4, so I can actually get rid of that. Mark a 4 over here. These three are going to be 0, 5, and 9. This one has to be a 5, which means I get a pair for those two. These ones have to be 2 and 3, so that's a 2 and that's a 3. Okay. Now, is it time? I really don't want to try and figure out this German whisper if I don't have to, so I'm going to just keep on avoiding it. And now I know that these three are 2, 6, and 7. This one adds up to 5, which means this could be either of the... Well, it can't be 7 because of that, so I can get that. Okay. This one here is a 2, which makes that a 7 and that a 2. And these three down here are 4, 6, and 9. So that's a 4. This is a 6, 9 pair. Okay. Well then. Yeah, it might be inevitable that I have to actually figure this out now. This one has to be at least 10. And it can get up to 13, potentially. No, it can't anymore. So this one just can't be an 8, because 13 would be 6 plus 7, or 9 plus 4, both of which are no longer possible. So this one now is maximized at 7, so it's 1, 4, 5, 1, 4, 7, or 6. And that means that this can be... can this be a 12? Yes, with 4, 8. So this one could be 4, 8, which means it can be that any of these numbers over here could be the correct number. If this one has a 6 in it, then yeah, no, I can still have numbers, so I can't determine anything about that. This column over here is a 1, 5, 8, so I can determine that's a 1. This one's 5 or 8, this one's 5 or 8. Oh, that was just 8. That one's 5. That's a 1, that's an 8. Okay. Now then, this one is 1, 4, 5, or 1, 4, no, this one just is 4 or 6. Because 1, 7, and 5 are all gone, so then that means this adds up to exactly 10, which makes that a 1, and that cleared the last fog square, so now I'm at least good there. That's a 5 and a 4 and a 7, and that's a 5, 9 pair down there. Over here I need... Let's see, what do I still need? This square needs to have one of its 2 as a 4, because 4 is getting seen from those. Down here I need a 3 and a 7. And this one needs 0, 4, 8, and 9, which means this one's a 4, 9. And this one over here has to then be an 8. This has to be a 9, and that's a 6. And then I just need 0 and 3 in here, which is like this, and oh man, there we go. This puzzle, very tricky. I quite enjoyed it, and honestly, probably one of my longest, well, definitely my longest solve on the channel, but guess I'll see you next time I see you.